I have more money than anyone in my family has ever had, and most of them don't speak to me anymore. This is the part of getting rich nobody puts in the montage, not the number, what the number costs you at the dinner table. I was raised by two parents who came to this country with less than $500 between them. I watched money leave our house faster than it ever arrived. And by the time I was 30, I had built something worth more than every relative I have combined, and it made me a stranger to almost all of them. This is the full story, how the ceiling gets built into you before you're old enough to notice it, and what actually happens the day you break it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. You are 9 years old at the kitchen table and you've just asked why you can't go on the class trip. Your father doesn't tell it like a story. He says a number flat and that's the end of the conversation. You didn't go. That was the first time you understood that money in your house wasn't something anyone managed. It was something everyone survived. Nobody sat you down and explained any of this. The education happened in smaller moments than that. It happened in the way your mother's shoulders dropped when the phone rang from a number she didn't recognize, because back then unknown numbers only ever meant one thing. It happened in the silence after the mail came, and the way she moved faster through the kitchen on the days a bill was due, like if she just kept moving the number at the bottom of the envelope couldn't catch her. There was a jar on the top shelf, pushed to the back where you had to stand on something to reach it. Cash inside, rolled up, no interest, no plan, just money sitting in the dark waiting for the next thing to go wrong. And something always went wrong. The jar would come down, the bills would come out, and for a few days the whole house felt like it was holding its breath until it filled back up again. That's what money was to you before you had a word for it. Not a tool, not something that grew, a buffer between your family and the next bad thing. And here's what nobody tells you when you're 9 years old standing on a chair to reach that jar. Your family wasn't behind. Most American households right now keep less than $1,000 in savings they can actually get to. Your family wasn't the exception. Your family was the norm. You knew the way your father's jaw would tighten when the car made a sound it didn't make the day before, doing the same silent math every time. What the repair would cost against what was actually in the account. You knew not to ask for things during certain weeks of the month. You learned to read the calendar not by dates but by the rhythm of your parents' voices, looser at the start of the month, tighter as it wore on. You could read your family's entire financial state without a single number ever being said out loud, the way other kids read weather. That's not poverty, that's inheritance. A way of holding money and being held by it, passed down not through conversation but through rooms, through silences, through the sound of a refrigerator door closing slowly while someone counted what was left inside. You didn't choose the ceiling. You were born under it. For a long time it just felt like the sky. There's a version of this that gets told wrong all the time, like the ceiling is only about how much money a family has. It isn't. It's about what money is allowed to mean inside a house. In some homes, a bad month is a conversation. In yours, a bad month was a mood that moved through every room, one that changed how loud people spoke, how late they stayed up, whether the television even got turned on. You learned the difference between that kind of house and the other kind long before you ever set foot inside one, a friend's place maybe, where nobody flinched when the phone rang, where a bill in the mail didn't change the temperature of the room. You didn't have language for what you were noticing. You just knew something was different there, and you knew enough not to ask about it out loud. That's the actual inheritance. Not a lack of money, a lack of ease around it. And ease isn't something you can save your way into. You can end up with more in the bank than your parents ever had and still flinch at an unknown number calling your phone, because the flinch was installed long before you had a bank account worth protecting. But something was already shifting, because somewhere in the middle of all that survival math, a different kind of number started forming in your head, one you weren't taught, one nobody asked you to calculate. You started noticing the businesses around your own neighborhood the way other kids notice sports scores. Which stores stayed busy and which ones quietly disappeared. Which owners drove something different than what they sold. You didn't know what any of it meant yet. You just knew you were paying attention to something your friends weren't. Everything I'm about to tell you about the next 10 years, the money I lost, the friends I lost, the number that finally broke through, all of it traces back to one decision I made at 19 in a parking lot that I never told anyone about until now. By 19 you're working a job that pays just above minimum wage, and you've saved something you're proud of without telling a single person, a few $1,000s put away one shift at a time. You take almost all of it and try to start something. A website, a license, an ad campaign that runs for 10 days and brings back exactly nothing. You check the account on an ordinary Thursday morning and the number staring back at you is close to zero. Your chest does something specific. Not panic, something quieter and worse than panic. The particular feeling of having tried and having the world say nothing back. You don't tell anyone. You go back to work the next day like nothing happened. That's the part nobody puts a name to, not the losing, the staying anyway. Somewhere in that same stretch of time you notice the group chat has gone quiet on your name. Nobody had a conversation about it. You just slowly became someone who wasn't available, and eventually people stop reaching for someone who isn't there. When you lose money you know exactly what you lost. When you lose the people who knew you before any of this, there's no number for it. You just feel it on the nights your phone stays quiet, but you keep going. Second attempt, smaller and smarter this time. You take on one small client, then a second, charging almost nothing because you don't yet believe you're allowed to charge more. The work is good, the results are real. And slowly you notice something that will end up mattering more than any single client. The price was never really about the work. It was about what you let yourself believe you were worth. So you raise it. Not dramatically, just enough to test whether the ceiling was real or just a story you'd been telling yourself since you were 9 years old. Nobody pushes back. The client pays it without blinking, and something quiet shifts in you that day that has nothing to do with the money. A handful of clients becomes a real structure, other people you now coordinate, a system instead of a single set of hands. A monthly number that used to feel like a fantasy starts landing in your account every single month like it's ordinary. You check it twice the first time it happens because the first time never feels real. There's no one to tell, there's no ceremony. You just pay the people who work with you, answer the messages, and open the next problem the next morning because that's what building something actually looks like day to day, not a highlight reel. Just the same unglamorous task repeated with slightly more skill each time. What was a side project turns into the whole thing. Real recurring revenue, the kind that doesn't need you to trade another hour for another dollar. And with that shift comes a different kind of attention. That's the year someone with real money wants to buy a piece of what you built. You sit across a table from people who talk about your work like it's an asset instead of your life. They've done this before, clearly, this exact conversation with other people who built other things. They name a number, one that would erase every worry you've carried since you were a kid standing on a chair reaching for a coffee jar. It would set your parents up. It would end the arithmetic your whole family has been running for decades. You could say yes right there in that room and never think about money the same anxious way again. And you say no, not because you don't feel the pull of it, you feel all of it, sitting in that chair. You say no because some quieter part of you has started to understand something the number can't buy. That you're not finished yet, and that selling now would mean handing someone else the thing you built specifically, because you were the only person who'd ever run out of other options. Turning that down is the moment everything with my family started to change. Not because of what I said no to, because of what saying no meant I'd become. Months later, the number crosses into something that doesn't feel like it belongs to you when you see it on a screen. You're sitting in the same ordinary place you've always sat, nothing around you has changed, and the number in your hand no longer fits inside the life surrounding it. You put the phone face down and just sit there for a second doing nothing, which is something you haven't done in years. This is not what arriving looks like in the movies. There's no music, no exhale, just an ordinary morning and a number that has quietly outgrown everything around it. And almost immediately, a completely new set of problems shows up in a language nobody prepared you for. An accountant uses a phrase you've never heard and you write it down to look up later. A lawyer explains something you need and you nod along, feeling for the first time since you were 9 years old standing on that chair like you're back in a room where everyone else understands something you don't. Only about a third of Americans have any real plan in place for what happens to their money long term. You spent years without a map and territory that punishes you for getting it wrong, and you find that out the expensive way, a mistake that costs you a number with a lot of zeros on it, simply because nobody ever told you the question you needed to ask. You don't sleep well for a few nights after, not because you can't cover it, because not seeing it coming means there are other things you're still not seeing. This is the part nobody warns you about when they talk about getting rich. They talk about the number like it's the finish line. It isn't. It's the starting line for a completely different kind of competence, one built from rooms full of people who grew up around this language the way you grew up around the coffee jar and the tightening jaw. You're not behind because you're incapable. You're behind because the curriculum simply never reached the house you grew up in. And catching up costs real money, paid in real mistakes on a timeline nobody warns you about in advance. You pick up the phone to call your mother. You want to tell her the number. You sit there trying to figure out how you'd even start that sentence and you put the phone back down. Not because you don't want to share it, because the sentence doesn't exist yet. The language between you was built for a different set of problems, and this one doesn't translate. That gap between what you've built and who you can actually bring into it is where everything quietly starts to cost you. It shows up in small, ordinary moments, not one big one. A relative calls one night not really to catch up. There's a situation, he needs help by a certain day or something falls apart. He never asks directly, he just describes it long enough that the ask becomes obvious, and then he goes quiet, and the quiet is the question. You say yes, you send it. And something in the relationship changes that neither of you names out loud. You're no longer the same kind of person facing the same kind of problem, and you both feel it. It shows up again with a friend who's known you since before any of this. The calls that used to happen every week start getting shorter, then further apart, until one day you realize it's been over a month. You reach out. He answers friendly enough, but something's different and neither of you says what. Nobody in your family sat you down and decided to treat you differently. That's what makes it so hard to name. There was no argument, no falling out, no single sentence you could point to and say that's where it went wrong. It's smaller than that and quieter and somehow harder to fix because of how small it is. It's a joke that used to land and doesn't anymore. It's being the person people call when something's wrong instead of the person people call just to talk. It's watching a room go slightly more careful the moment you walk into it, the same way your own house used to go careful around a phone call from an unknown number. You used to think the ceiling was the hard part. It wasn't. The ceiling was simple, you either broke through it or you didn't. Nobody prepares you for what's on the other side of it because what's on the other side isn't freedom, it's distance. And it's a distance you built with your own two hands, one decision at a time, in exchange for something you can't put back once you have it. Money doesn't just change what you can afford. It changes who's still willing to sit at the table with you.